That night, no one aboard the USS Leviathan imagined their patrol in the South China Sea would be written into classified history books. Commander Alexandra Lex Morgan was under strict orders from the Pentagon. Stand down, stay hidden, avoid confrontation. But through her periscope, she saw an American merchant ship zigzagging in panic, shadowed at knife-edge distance by a Chinese destroyer. On the decks of that cargo vessel, terrified sailors waved frantically toward the ocean, praying anyone would defy the silence. Lex's knuckles tightened around the comms handset as Admiral Foster's voice came down the line. "Do not surface. Do not engage. Washington will handle this diplomatically." It was the kind of order that sounded safe in a carpeted Pentagon office, but from 200 feet below, it meant watching Americans die in real time. Her crew knew that look in her emerald eyes. They had seen it during the reactor crisis months earlier when she risked fatal radiation to save 14 sailors. They knew she was weighing more than a career. She was weighing her oath, her conscience, and the possibility that one wrong move could ignite a war between nuclear powers. What happened next would not only test Commander Lex Morgan's loyalty to orders, it would decide whether a single act of defiance could prevent World War III. Commander Alexandra Morgan stood in the USS Leviathan's command center, her steel-gray eyes fixed on the sonar display that had been her constant companion for the past 18 months. The nuclear submarine cut silently through the South China Sea at a depth of 200 feet. Her Virginia-class hull designed for exactly this kind of sensitive patrol mission. What had started as routine surveillance in one of the world's most contested waterways had suddenly become anything but routine. The command center hummed with the quiet efficiency that marked Lex's leadership style. After the radiation incident at Naval Base San Diego 3 months ago, where she had risked her life to save 14 sailors, her crew had developed an almost religious faith in their commander's judgment. They knew she would never ask them to do anything she wouldn't do herself, a lesson learned through blood, sweat, and the kind of sacrifice that forges legends. Contact bearing 280, range 12,000 yards, sonar technician First Class Davis reported, his voice tight with concentration. At 26, Davis was one of the youngest senior sonar operators in the Pacific Fleet, but his ears were legendary for their ability to distinguish between a whale's song and a submarine's whisper. "She's big, ma'am." Destroyer class, flying Chinese colors according to ESM. Lex moved to the periscope station with the fluid grace that came from 15 years of submarine operations. Her weathered hands, still bearing the faint scars from her diving accident during the USS Arizona rescue, gripped the handles with practiced ease. The periscope rose silently through the dark waters, breaking the surface with barely a ripple. Through the lens, she could see the imposing silhouette of what her intelligence briefings had identified as a Chinese Type 052D destroyer, the Kunming, according to the tactical display. The warship's angular superstructure and distinctive radar arrays marked it as one of China's most advanced surface combatants, capable of launching everything from anti-ship missiles to surface-to-air weapons that could down aircraft at ranges exceeding 150 miles. But it wasn't the destroyer's impressive arsenal that caught Lex's attention. It was what the warship was shadowing. "Ma'am, we've got a second contact," Davis called out, his voice now carrying an edge of concern. "American-flagged cargo vessel Pacific Dawn. She's running scared, Commander. Engine noise suggests they're pushing well beyond normal cruise power. But what Lex saw next through that periscope would challenge everything she thought she knew about naval protocol. The cargo ship Pacific Dawn was zigzagging erratically across the gray waters, black smoke pouring from her aging stack as she pushed her engines beyond their design limits. Lex could see the desperation in the vessel's movement, sharp course corrections every few minutes, the kind of evasive maneuvers that merchant vessels only attempted when they genuinely feared for their lives. The Chinese destroyer maintained a distance of barely 800 yards, close enough to be intimidating without technically violating international maritime law, far enough to avoid giving the Americans legal justification for military intervention. It was a masterclass in gray zone warfare, the kind of calculated provocation that had become increasingly common in these disputed waters. "Get me Admiral Foster on encrypted comms," Lex ordered, her voice carrying the authority that came from commanding one of the Navy's most sophisticated weapon systems. "And I want a full tactical picture. What's the Pacific Dawn carrying, and why is Beijing so interested in her?" Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, Lex's executive officer and a rising star in the submarine community, approached with a tablet displaying real-time intelligence feeds. At 32, Mitchell had already earned a reputation as one of the sharpest tactical minds in the fleet, which was exactly why Lex had requested her for the Leviathan's crew. Commander, according to her manifest, the Pacific Dawn is carrying agricultural equipment bound for the Philippines. But Mitchell paused, her expression troubled. Intelligence suggests she might also be transporting sensitive communications equipment for our allies in Manila. Lex nodded grimly. If that intelligence was accurate, it would explain Beijing's interest. The Chinese government had been increasingly aggressive about intercepting what they claimed were dual-use technologies bound for American allies in the region. What's our tactical situation? The Chinese vessel hasn't made any overtly aggressive moves, Mitchell reported, swiping through screens of data. Technically, they're in international waters, maintaining legal separation distances, but their radio chatter suggests they're trying to force the cargo ship into Chinese territorial waters where they can claim jurisdictional authority. Technically doesn't matter when you've got 32 civilian crew members who think they're about to be boarded by a foreign warship, Lex replied, watching the cargo ship's increasingly desperate maneuvers through the periscope. Those sailors are terrified, and terror makes people do stupid things. The comm system crackled to life with the distinctive tone that indicated a priority message from Pacific Fleet Command. Leviathan, this is Admiral Foster. What's your situation out there? Admiral, we have a Chinese Type 05 2D destroyer conducting what appears to be aggressive shadowing of American merchant vessel Pacific Dawn. The cargo ship is showing signs of distress, and I assess the situation as potentially escalatory, requesting permission to surface and provide escort assistance. The silence on the other end stretched for what felt like an eternity. Lex could picture Admiral Foster in his office at Pearl Harbor, surrounded by intelligence analysts and political advisors, all of them acutely aware that the wrong decision could trigger a crisis that would make headlines around the world. When Admiral Foster's voice finally returned, it carried the weight of Pentagon politics that Lex had grown to despise during her years of service. Negative, Leviathan. Stand down and maintain current depth. Do not, I repeat, do not surface or make contact with either vessel. The Secretary of State is handling this through diplomatic channels. What the Admiral said next would put Lex in an impossible position between duty and conscience. Lex's knuckles whitened as she gripped the comm handset. She had heard this song before. Politicians in air-conditioned offices making decisions about life-and-death situations they would never have to face personally. Sir, with respect, that cargo ship is showing clear signs of distress. If they have medical emergencies, or if the Chinese escalate their harassment. Commander Morgan, Admiral Foster's voice cut through her objection with bureaucratic finality. You have your orders. The diplomatic ramifications of American military involvement at this time could be catastrophic. Foster out. The comm went dead, leaving the submarine's command center in the kind of tense silence that every military officer recognized, the moment when duty and conscience collided with enough force to shatter careers. Every pair of eyes in the command center was on Lex, waiting to see how their commander would handle being ordered to watch American civilians potentially die while diplomats shuffled papers in Washington conference rooms. These were sailors who had followed her into a radioactive hell 3 months ago, who had seen her risk everything to save people she had never met. They knew their commander's character, and they knew she was about to face the hardest decision of her naval career. Chief Petty Officer Reynolds, a 20-year Navy veteran whose weathered face told the story of deployments from the Persian Gulf to the Arctic Ocean, stepped closer to the command station. He had served with Lex since her first submarine command 5 years ago, and he could read her moods better than a barometer read weather. Ma'am, he said quietly, passive sonar is picking up increased radio chatter from the cargo ship. Sounds like someone's in medical distress. Heavy breathing, elevated heart rate in the voice patterns. Through the periscope, Lex could see crew members on the Pacific Dawn's deck waving frantically in their direction. They had spotted the Leviathan's periscope during its brief surface contact, and they were clearly hoping for help from their own navy. Some of them were pointing at the Chinese destroyer, their body language screaming desperation and fear. But Lex Morgan had never been one to abandon Americans in need, and what she did next would shock her own crew. Lex stepped back from the periscope, her mind racing through the tactical and political implications of her next decision. She thought about the 14 sailors she had saved from the flooded reactor compartment, about the resignation letter she had written but never submitted after being ordered to abandon them. She thought about the oath she had sworn as a young ensign, promising to protect American lives regardless of personal cost. "Diving officer, bring us to periscope depth and maintain position," she commanded, her voice carrying a dangerous edge that her crew had learned to recognize. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Mitchell whispered urgently, moving closer so the rest of the crew couldn't hear. "Admiral Foster specifically ordered us to maintain depth and avoid contact. If Pacific Fleet Command finds out we surfaced—" "I heard what he ordered," Lex cut her off, her steel gray eyes reflecting the kind of determination that had earned her the Silver Star for gallantry during her SEAL operations years ago. "But I also swore an oath to protect American lives, not to hide underwater while civilians die, because some Pentagon bureaucrat is worried about his next promotion." She moved to the communication station where Radio Man Second Class Torres was monitoring multiple frequencies simultaneously. "Radio, patch me through to the Pacific Dawn on Merchant Marine Emergency Frequency, and make sure we're recording everything for the log." "Aye, ma'am. You're connected on Channel 16. Lex picked up the handset, knowing that her next words could end her career or prevent an international crisis that could escalate beyond anyone's control. "Merchant Vessel Pacific Dawn, this is USS Leviathan. Please state the nature of your emergency." The response came immediately, filled with relief and barely controlled desperation. "USS Leviathan, thank God you're here. This is Captain Williams of the Pacific Dawn. We have a crew member having what appears to be a massive heart attack, and that Chinese destroyer has been following us for 6 hours. Every time we try to change course for medical assistance, they match our movements. We can't reach port with them shadowing us like this." Lex felt the familiar fire in her chest, the same righteous anger that had driven her to risk fatal radiation exposure to save 14 sailors, the same fury that had motivated her to push through SEAL training when instructors told her she wasn't tough enough. Americans were in danger, people who had done nothing more threatening than try to deliver farm equipment to an ally, and she was being ordered to do nothing while they potentially died. What happened next would test every principle Lex Morgan held dear. "Captain Williams, this is Commander Morgan. How is your crew member's condition right now?" "Commander, he's unconscious. Pulse is irregular, and we don't have any medical equipment beyond basic first aid. Our radio operator Jenkins has some EMT training, but he says the man needs immediate advanced cardiac care or—" The voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Lex closed her eyes for a moment, weighing 15 years of naval service against the life of one merchant sailor she had never met. When she opened them, her decision was made. "Chief Reynolds, what's our current tactical position relative to the Chinese destroyer?" 400 yards horizontal separation, 150 vertical, ma'am. We're in their acoustic shadow. They probably don't have a solid track on our exact position." Lex studied the tactical display on the main screen, her mind automatically calculating angles, distances, and response times that had been drilled into her through thousands of hours of training. The Chinese captain was playing a dangerous but predictable game, close enough to intimidate the cargo ship, but not close enough to justify American military intervention. It was textbook gray zone warfare, designed to probe American resolve without crossing the line into open hostility. But Lex Morgan hadn't spent 15 years in submarines, including 3 combat deployments, to be outmaneuvered by political games played by people who had never heard a torpedo tube flood. "Sonar, what's the acoustic signature on that destroyer? What can you tell me about her capabilities and intentions?" Davis bent over his console, fine-tuning the passive sonar array that was the Leviathan's primary sensor in these situations. "Ma'am, she's running loud. Older sonar systems, probably trying to be seen and heard rather than operating covertly. Based on her engine noise and maneuvering patterns, I'd assess she's trying to demonstrate presence rather than prepare for combat operations." A plan began forming in Lex's mind, dangerous and potentially career-ending, but possibly the only way to help the Pacific Dawn without creating the kind of international incident that could spiral into something much worse than a single medical emergency. "Communications, I want you to patch me through to the Chinese destroyer on International Maritime Emergency Frequency. Standard protocols for ship-to-ship communication." Lieutenant Mitchell's face went pale, and several other crew members exchanged worried glances. "Commander, if Admiral Foster finds out you made direct contact with a Chinese warship, he won't find out unless someone tells him," Lex replied, her gray eyes sweeping the command center with the kind of intensity that had made her one of the youngest submarine commanders in the Pacific Fleet. "And I trust every person in this compartment to understand that sometimes saving lives requires creative interpretation of orders." You won't believe what Lex Morgan said to that Chinese destroyer captain. The comm system crackled as Radio Man Torres established the connection using protocols that had been developed during the Cold War for exactly these kinds of delicate situations. "Chinese naval vessel, this is USS Leviathan. Do you copy?" A long pause filled the command center, broken only by the quiet hum of the submarine's life support systems and the distant sound of sonar pings. Then a heavily accented but professionally fluent English voice responded, "USS Leviathan, this is Captain Chen Wei of the People's Liberation Army Navy ship Kunming. You are operating in international waters without prior coordination." Lex had studied the intelligence files on Captain Chen during her pre-deployment briefings. 48 years old, graduate of the People's Liberation Army Navy Command College, veteran of multiple deployments in disputed waters from the South China Sea to the Indian Ocean, a professional naval officer who understood both the capabilities of his ship and the delicate political balance that governed operations in these contested waters. "Affirmative, Captain Chen." "As are you," Lex replied, keeping her voice professionally neutral while mentally calculating the diplomatic implications of every word. "I'm monitoring distress signals from the American merchant vessel you've been escorting. They report a medical emergency aboard that requires immediate assistance." Another pause, longer this time. Lex could imagine Captain Chen conferring with his political officer and communications team, trying to determine whether this was an American trap or a genuine humanitarian situation. "We have observed no distress signals from the merchant vessel," came the careful response. Lex smiled grimly, recognizing the diplomatic dance that was about to unfold. Captain Chen couldn't admit to monitoring American merchant communications without acknowledging that his routine patrol was actually targeted harassment. But he also couldn't ignore a direct communication from an American naval vessel without risking escalation. "Captain Chen, I understand you're conducting navigation exercises in these waters. Might I suggest coordinating our operations to ensure maritime safety and prevent any misunderstandings that could reflect poorly on both our nations?" Chief Reynolds looked at Lex with barely concealed admiration. In a single sentence, she had accomplished 3 critical objectives: offered the Chinese captain face-saving cover by reframing his harassment mission as legitimate naval exercises, opened the door for cooperation without either side losing face, and subtly threatened escalation if the situation continued. The response came more quickly this time, with a tone that suggested genuine interest. "What do you propose, Commander Morgan?" The solution Lex Morgan proposed would either save lives or start World War III. Lex took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would either diffuse a dangerous situation or create an international incident that could dominate headlines for weeks. "Captain Chen, I propose a joint humanitarian operation that demonstrates both nations' commitment to maritime safety and international cooperation. My vessel can provide immediate medical consultation via radio to assist with the emergency aboard the American merchant ship, while your vessel maintains its navigation exercise at a safe distance that ensures all parties can operate without interference." The silence stretched for nearly a full minute. Lex could imagine Captain Chen conferring with his political officer, weighing the benefits of appearing humanitarian and professional against the risks of seeming weak or allowing American military assets to operate freely in waters that Beijing considered strategically vital. The entire command center held its breath, understanding that they were witnessing a moment that could determine whether 32 American merchant sailors lived or died, whether 2 nuclear powers stepped back from confrontation or moved closer to it. Finally, Captain Chen's voice returned with what sounded like grudging respect. "USS Leviathan, the Kunming, acknowledges your proposal. We will maintain position at 2,000 meters while you provide medical assistance to the merchant vessel. This is a humanitarian gesture in accordance with international maritime law, not an acknowledgement of any territorial claims or jurisdictional authority by either party." "Understood and appreciated, Captain Chen. Your professionalism reflects well on the People's Liberation Army Navy. Leviathan out. The command center erupted in barely suppressed excitement, with crew members exchanging glances that mixed relief with admiration for their commander's diplomatic skills. But Lex quickly focused them back on the immediate task at hand. Doc Martinez to the radio room. Immediately. We've got a cardiac emergency to handle, and I want our best medical expertise available for consultation. Hospital Corpsman First Class Martinez had been with the Leviathan for 2 years, serving as both the submarine's primary medical officer and one of the most experienced emergency medical technicians in the Pacific Fleet. His background included deployments with Marine units in combat zones, where he had learned to provide advanced life support under conditions that would challenge most hospital emergency rooms. As Martinez rushed to establish medical communication with the Pacific Dawn, Lex watched through the periscope as the Chinese destroyer gradually increased its distance from the cargo ship. It was a delicate dance of international relations played out on the open ocean, Captain Chen maintaining his presence to satisfy Beijing's requirements while giving the Americans enough operational space to conduct their humanitarian mission. But just when everything seemed under control, Admiral Foster's voice crackled over the encrypted comm. Leviathan, this is Admiral Foster. Pacific Fleet Intelligence reports that satellite surveillance shows you've moved to periscope depth and the Chinese vessel has altered course and distance. Explain immediately. Lex's heart sank, but her voice remained steady and professional. She had known this moment would come, the moment when her career would be weighed against the lives of American civilians. Admiral, we've initiated humanitarian medical assistance for a cardiac emergency aboard American merchant vessel Pacific Dawn. The Chinese vessel has cooperated by maintaining safe distance in accordance with international maritime protocols. Commander Morgan, I specifically ordered you to maintain depth and avoid contact with either vessel. You have directly disobeyed a lawful order from your superior officer. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Lex could feel the eyes of her crew watching to see how she would respond to charges that could end not just her career, but potentially result in court-martial proceedings. Sir, American lives were at immediate risk. I initiated medical assistance only using established diplomatic protocols to de-escalate potential conflict with the Chinese vessel while providing aid to civilians in distress. My actions were consistent with both international maritime law and my oath as a naval officer to protect American lives. The comm went silent for a long moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. Lex could picture Admiral Foster in the Pentagon Situation Room, surrounded by politicians and lawyers who were more concerned with avoiding negative headlines than with the life of a merchant sailor who might be dying while they debated jurisdictional authority. Stand by, Leviathan. As they waited for Admiral Foster's response, Doc Martinez's voice came over the internal comm system. Commander, we've established communication with their EMT. Patient is a 54-year-old male, conscious but with irregular heartbeat and chest pain. We're walking them through administering aspirin and nitrates from their emergency medical kit. Cargo ship is requesting permission to proceed to Manila at best speed for advanced cardiac care. What Admiral Foster said next would determine whether Lex Morgan's career was over. The encrypted comm crackled back to life, but this time the voice that emerged was not Admiral Foster's. Instead, it was a voice that Lex recognized from classified briefings and news conferences, the unmistakable authority of the Secretary of Defense himself. Commander Morgan, this is Secretary Patterson. I'm speaking to you directly from the National Security Council emergency session. Are American lives currently safe? Lex straightened to attention instinctively, even though she was alone in a submarine command center thousands of miles from Washington. Yes, Mr. Secretary. The medical emergency has been stabilized through remote consultation, and diplomatic tensions have been successfully de-escalated through professional military-to-military communication. The Chinese vessel is cooperating with humanitarian operations. Outstanding work, Commander. The President has been briefed on the situation, and he specifically asked me to convey his appreciation for your initiative in preventing what could have escalated into a serious international crisis. Proceed with escort duties until the merchant vessel reaches Philippine territorial waters. The Chinese captain's cooperation will be noted in diplomatic channels as a positive gesture that reflects well on professional military relationships. The relief in the command center was palpable, with crew members finally allowing themselves to smile and exchange congratulatory glances. But Lex remained focused on completing the mission that had started with a single distress call and had somehow evolved into a template for international crisis management. I, Mr. Secretary, USS Leviathan will maintain escort position and ensure safe passage to territorial waters. As the USS Leviathan surfaced fully and took position 1,000 yards from the Pacific Dawn, Lex could see through the periscope that the Chinese destroyer was maintaining its respectful distance of 2,000 meters. Captain Chen had been given his own face-saving narrative, a successful joint humanitarian operation that demonstrated Chinese naval professionalism and commitment to international maritime safety. 3 hours later, as the Pacific Dawn crossed into Philippine territorial waters with her crew member stable and receiving proper medical care via radio consultation with Manila General Hospital, Lex received a final transmission from Captain Chen that would stay with her for the rest of her naval career. USS Leviathan, this is Kunming. Well-executed operation, Commander Morgan. Your professionalism today reflects the best traditions of naval service. Until we meet again in these waters, fair winds and following seas. Likewise, Captain Chen, your cooperation saved lives today, and that will not be forgotten. Fair winds and following seas. As the Chinese destroyer turned north toward its home port, its wake cutting a clean line through the darkening waters of the South China Sea, Chief Reynolds approached Lex with the kind of knowing smile that comes from witnessing something extraordinary. "Ma'am, that was some pretty creative diplomacy. Remind me never to play poker against you." Lex looked out at the merchant ship disappearing toward Manila, its crew safe and sound, its cargo intact, its dignity preserved. Sometimes the best way to avoid a war, Chief, is to remember that the sailor on the other ship is just trying to get home safe, same as us. Captain Chen has a family in Shanghai, probably worries about his kids' homework and his parents' health, just like any American naval officer. When you remember the human element, solutions become possible. Lieutenant Mitchell, who had watched the entire operation with the fascination of someone witnessing a masterclass in naval leadership, shook her head in amazement. "Commander, how did you know Captain Chen would cooperate instead of escalating?" "Because," Lex replied, adjusting the periscope for one final look at the Chinese destroyer's departing silhouette, "I gave him what every professional military officer wants, a chance to look competent, compassionate, and strong, all at the same time. He gets to report to Beijing that he successfully conducted a joint humanitarian operation with the U.S. Navy, demonstrating Chinese naval professionalism on the international stage. We get to save American lives and prevent a crisis. Everybody wins." Later that night, Lex received a series of messages that would change everything about how she viewed international relations. But you haven't heard the most incredible part yet. The encrypted message came directly from the Pentagon. "Commander Morgan, your actions prevented what analysts believe would have escalated into the most serious naval confrontation since the Cuban Missile Crisis. This incident will serve as a new template for gray zone operations worldwide. Well done, Secretary Patterson." The second message would make Lex question everything she thought she knew about her enemies. "Commander Morgan, the crew member you saved was Thomas Mitchell, father of 3. His daughter Sarah wants to serve on submarines, inspired by the commander who saved her father's life. Thank you for proving that wisdom is the most powerful weapon. Captain Williams, Pacific Dawn." But the third message shocked her most. "Commander Morgan, I have reported that the American submarine commander demonstrated exceptional professionalism. Professional relationships like ours prevent misunderstandings that could harm both nations. I hope our paths cross again. Captain Chen Wei, Plan." As the USS Leviathan resumed patrol, Lex realized her decision had done more than save one man. It had shown that human decency could triumph over political calculation. Some battles are won not with weapons, but with the courage to do what's right when nobody is watching. That night, nobody knew that Commander Lex Morgan's single decision would change not just lives, but the fate of international relations forever. And in the classified files of 3 different nations, her actions would be studied as a masterclass in military diplomacy, proving that sometimes the greatest victories are won not through force, but through the courage to see the humanity in one's enemies and the wisdom to find solutions that honor the dignity of all involved.